Hello, Happy New Year to you both.
And to
And
you.
congrats on Stonehouse. It's a really excellent way to kick off the year, I think. A really
Thank you.
interesting way to kick off the year. So thank you for taking the time to talk with everybody today. I know it's a lot to pack into one day, but it's appreciated. Um, I wanted to talk about, it's a really fascinating story, and it's kind of one that I think most people can't believe isn't better known given everything about it. Seems completely memorable, but it does seem to be kind of forgotten, even on both sides of the pond. John, you referenced that even in the script when Stonehouse goes to his final interview, that they may not remember who you are, so you have to state your story and kind of be succinct about it. So my question is for John Preston. How did you come across the story, and what made you think that now was kind of the right time to revisit it or even introduce it to people?
Well, you're absolutely right. He is a kind of forgotten man in many respects. And yet he was once hailed as being possible prime minister material. And so he did have this kind of huge and ignoble fall. And I remember it not particularly well, but I certainly remember it because it was, as far as I was concerned, the first time that I realized that our leaders were not kind of morally our betters, which was something I was definitely brought up to believe. And it was abundantly obvious in the case of Stonehouse, who had done this plainly kind of ludicrous thing of faking his own death and then reappearing on the other side of the world 5 weeks later. And I read a book called A Very English Scandal, which was made into a TV series about a man called Jeremy Thorpe with Hugh Grant. And I was toyed with the idea of writing a book about Stonehouse and then sort of fought shy of it because I thought I'd just be repeating myself. But then I thought, well, maybe if I try and write it as a script, people won't accuse me of repeating myself quite so blatantly. And it did seem a fascinating story and a kind of weirdly timely story in the sense that there are weird parallels between the 1970s in the UK and what's going on now in the UK. So it seemed fun to look at someone who was in many respects a kind of emblematic figure of the derangement of the times in the 1970s, and to see, could he have got away with it now? Which the obvious answer is no, he couldn't, because you just can't fake your own death that easily. Nonetheless, there are sort of strange parallels to what's going on now.
Well, and he, at face value, he does seem kind of hapless, but at the same time, a complete opportunist, because you see him kind of as a sponge, soaking up the Day of the Jackal and, oh, the people at Somerset, the births and deaths don't talk to each other, all of those kind of things. As you were writing and other John, as you were directing, how did your opinions of him kind of evolve as you discovered more about him and the situation as you kind of kept working on the project?
I think that the first time I heard about him was when I read John's script. Yeah, I had never heard the story before, so it was fascinating to see. And there's so much been written about John Stonehouse, yeah, from his family members, extremely different takes on who he was as well. We have a version of him as well, which is, I don't even know if it's in the middle. It's a different take on John Stonehouse. So I think this guy is still like this enigma that people still really don't know who he was. Our version of him is more comedic. I think it makes him out to be it's farcical. He's outlandish and he's a bit of a buffoon, and I think Matthew plays that very well. So so in my mind, who our John Stonehouse is, he's quite a sort of hilarious character because of the ridiculous nature of his actions. Yeah. And I think it's important because when you're telling a story like this about a politician, why not make them out to be like that? Because they've dug their own hole really by starting off, they're supposed to be servants of the people, and by doing something so outrageous, I think you really deserve to have a story told about you in a funny way. A lot of the satirical, I don't know if I told you, I didn't tell you this, John Preston, but there's a magazine in the UK called Private Eye, and it's a big satiric. It's been running for 50 odd years. It's a big stickle. These guys are obsessed with the Stonehouse. They invited me to their editor Ian Hislop invited me to lunch at their thing because they were so delighted in how we had told the story about this politician, because it's really in the same mold as how they would approach it. And that was the biggest compliment I got, because, you know, for those who don't like the fact that we've made it comedic, I say I don't care, because I think it deserved it, you know.
That makes a lot of sense, and it is really heightened as you say, satirical, and he does come off as kind of buffoonish at times. But there's one scene in particular that I think of that's a bit of a tonal shift, which is that last meeting between Wilson and Stonehouse, where Wilson's kind of contemplating the end of his career, and John has just made that big speech to Parliament. Can you talk a bit about directing that scene, and other John, maybe you want to weigh into about writing that scene, just because it is kind of a bit of a shift from the rest of the series?
John, you go first, because the writing comes before the directing. So
yeah, I mean, well, you know, we don't know. No one knows why Harold Wilson resigned in, I can't even remember when he did resign, 1977, something like that, 76. It seemed to me that it was not a particular distortion of events to think that possibly what had happened with Stonehouse had contributed to Wilson's kind of disillusion, and the speeches that Stonehouse gives. There's one speech in particular about it was the humbug and hypocrisy that he witnessed in the Commons that precipitated him having his kind of breakdown. That, as far as I remember, is pretty much word for word what Stonehouse actually said. So it's very interesting that he should have blamed, not entirely plausibly, but nonetheless it's an interesting idea, should have blamed that humbug and hypocrisy that he witnessed. And I think that, you know, to some extent, Stonehouse's disillusion was mirrored in Wilson's disillusion, because Wilson, I think, had become increasingly worn down by the demands of the job. And I just think reached a point where he just had enough and wanted to throw in the towel. So I was, you know, I thought it would be, as it were, both interesting and permissible to kind of, you know, conflate those two events.
And I think as well, when you're going to an end point, right? And the end point we had, you know, obviously what happens to John, you know, he dies at the end, right? And I think for an audience to feel something for this guy at the end there, okay, it's great. We make him laugh, and we go on this you know, ridiculous farcical journey with him. But there needs to be a shift at some point in episode 3 to get them to that place at the end. Yeah. And I think that episode 3 definitely feels like a slightly different tonal shift. Probably halfway through it starts to do it, even before. So you have to sort of put your flag in the sand and say, right, where are we going to change this? You know, and then it's about talking to the actors and saying, right, we're going to play this one slightly different. I mean, I think the scene that you've just pointed out, I think Wilson, you show the master manipulator that Wilson is as well, right? Because he didn't get to being prime minister by not being able to manipulate as well. Yeah. And I think that was interesting as well for Kevin's character, you know, to show the skill that he had over Stonehouse as well. So, and then the way that we end that scene as well, and what the music's doing and everything as well, I think is really as a point to say to the audience, right, we're taking you in a slightly different place now, you know. I think that was it.
That's great. Thank you. Our time is up. So I just wanted to thank you both so much, and for such a great series. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how people react on this side of the pond to it as well.
Right.
I might be coming to Canada for my next film, so I might see you
well, hopefully it'll be warmer by the time you get here. Enjoy it once you're here.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. Okay.